Welcome in, everyone, to another deep dive. Today, we're going to try to get to the bottom of the Franklin DeWayne Alix case. We've got a ton of material to work with here, court records, news articles, that kind of thing. And it's going to be a tough one, obviously. But I think it's an important one.
Oh, absolutely. Right off the bat, the thing that really gets me is just how different Alex's early life seems compared to, what he ended up doing. I mean, this is a kid who was singing in the church choir teaching Sunday school. It's hard to imagine that same person going on to commit the crimes that he did.
It really is. It's like one of those classic stories where someone's got a good side and a bad side. But even with that early contrast, the thing is, his criminal record starts pretty small time. 17 years old trying to steal a city bus.
Yeah, that's a really interesting detail, isn't it? I mean, stealing a bus that takes some real planning. It's not just some spur of the moment thing. It makes you wonder if that was maybe a sign of what was to come.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah. And then you've got a car theft a little while later, then illegal firearm possession. Each time, it seems like the offenses are getting more and more serious. But it's almost as if he's not learning his lesson. It's like he's on this downward spiral.
A lot of criminals follow that kind of trajectory. They start small and then things escalate. But what's really strange here is that with Alex, there doesn't seem to be any of the usual reasons for this kind of behavior. He wasn't living in poverty. He wasn't involved in gangs. From what we can tell, he had a pretty normal upbringing.
So what's driving him then? That's what I don't get.
It's the million-dollar question.
And then in 1997, things take a really dark turn. Alex goes on this absolutely crazy 6-month crime spree all over Houston.
Yeah, this is where things get really scary. It's not just how many crimes he was committing, it's how much more violent they became. Like, he was becoming more and more indifferent to the people he was hurting.
Exactly. Like with Gregorio Ramirez, Alex tries to rob him, shoots him dead. And now Ramirez's wife is left to identify his body.
It's heartbreaking.
It makes you realize how much pain he inflicted on all these people, not just the victims themselves, but their families too.
And tragically, Ramirez was only the first. After that, Alex stages a car accident just so he can assault a woman. He murders Selamawi Taywold in cold blood. He shoots a security guard in the back. I mean, it just goes on and on.
Yeah, it was a really terrifying time for anyone living in Houston, especially if you lived in an apartment complex, because those seem to be his main targets.
And then there's that home invasion with Carol Bridgeford. Absolutely chilling. He kidnaps her, forces her into the trunk of her own car. Then he drives her home and robs the place, all while holding her hostage. And while he's there, Carol's brother Eric and his friends show up. They try to get away, but Alex chases them down and shoots Eric dead.
God, I can't even imagine what that family went through.
And then just the next day, Alex kills again Christopher Thomas shot while he's sitting in his car listening to music.
It's crazy. You have to wonder at this point what's going on inside his head.
Is it just desperation? Is he feeling less and less guilty about what he's doing? Does he just enjoy the power? It's hard to say, but I think we might get some clues as we look into his arrest and trial.
So, you think about a guy like this on a crime spree, and you figure he'd go down in a blaze of glory. Big shootout with the cops.
Right.
But that's not what happens at all with Alex Houston police.
Yeah.
Just pick him up on January 6, 1998, no problem.
Yeah, it's not very dramatic, is it?
Not at all. But then here's where things get really weird. Alex confesses.
And not just a simple confession.
Right.
He actually confesses to killing Eric Bridgeford on videotape.
Yeah.
And then to top it all off, he leads the police right to the murder weapon.
That's what I don't get.
Yeah.
It's like he wanted to get caught.
It's a strange one, isn't it? Especially when you consider that later on during the trial, he tries to downplay everything.
So what do you make of that? Was he actually feeling remorseful? Did he just want the attention? Or was it all some kind of legal strategy?
Hard to say for sure, but it definitely raises some questions about what was going on in his head.
Yeah. And then you've got the trial itself, which just makes everything even more complicated. It's like Alex is trying to have it both ways. He admits to the kidnappings, but then he says that the sex was consensual, that the stuff he stole was actually gifts.
Yeah.
And that he killed Eric in self-defense.
We have to remember the kind of legal system we're dealing with here. In Texas, capital murder, which is what Alex was charged with, could mean the death penalty. They don't mess around with that stuff down there.
So maybe he's just trying to save his own skin.
Yeah.
Trying to make himself look less guilty so the jury won't sentence him to death.
Yeah, I think that's a real possibility.
And the defense team,
Yeah.
they're trying to present him as this guy who's not really evil. He just made some bad decisions. Maybe he was even forced into it. They talk about how he had a normal childhood, how he was involved in the church. They even bring in people who knew him before all this happened to say what a good guy he was.
It's pretty standard in these kinds of cases. They try to make the jury see the defendant as a human being, not just some monster.
But of course, the prosecution's not having any of it. They want Alix to get the death penalty. They're painting him as this unstoppable criminal, this predator who needs to be locked up for good.
Right. They're focusing on all the horrible things he did, how brutal his crimes were, how terrified he made people.
And then the defense comes out with this wild card. They say that Alix was actually being pressured into committing these crimes. They say that he owed a bunch of money to this drug dealer named Kevin Smith, and that Smith threatened to kill him if he didn't pay up. So basically, they're saying that Alix was forced into this whole crime spree.
Wow, so they're saying he was a victim too.
That's the argument anyway.
It definitely makes you think about who's really responsible in a situation like that. It's one thing to make bad choices, but what if you're being threatened with your life? How much free will do you really have then?
Yeah, that's a tough one. And of course, the prosecution says, even if this Kevin Smith guy was real, and even if Alix did owe him money, that doesn't excuse how violent he was.
They're saying he went way beyond what was necessary.
Yeah, exactly. They're pointing to the cruelty of his crimes, to the fact that he didn't seem to feel any remorse for what he did. So now it's up to the jury to decide whether they believe Alix merits. Do they see him as a victim of circumstance or a cold-blooded killer?
It's a huge responsibility for those jurors. They know that their decision could literally mean life or death for this guy.
And in August of 1998, after all that deliberation, the jury comes back with a verdict. They find Franklin DeWayne Alix guilty of capital murder.
That must have been a gut-wrenching moment.
Yeah, I can't imagine. And during the sentencing phase, the prosecution does a really good job of convincing the jury that the death penalty is the only option.
Right. They remind everyone about just how horrible Alix's crimes were, how he didn't seem to care about what he'd done, and how dangerous he would be if he was ever let out of prison.
So it sounds like the jury didn't really have much choice at that point.
Well, it's never an easy decision to make, but in this case, I think the evidence was pretty overwhelming.
And so on September 2 day, 1998, Franklin DeWayne Alix is officially sentenced to death. But here's the thing. The legal battle isn't over yet. A few years later, in 2006, there's this huge scandal involving the Houston Police Department's crime lab. Turns out they were doing some really shoddy work, mishandling evidence in a bunch of different cases. And Alix's case was one of them.
So this could be a break for Alix, right?
That's what his lawyers are hoping for. They're appealing his conviction, saying that the DNA evidence in the Gregorio Ramirez murder wasn't clear-cut. They're trying to create doubt, trying to make the court question whether Alix really did it.
So they're basically saying that there's a chance Alix could be innocent of at least one of the murders?
Yeah, that's the argument anyway. They're hoping that if they can cast enough doubt on the evidence, they might be able to overturn his conviction, or at least get his sentence reduced.
It's a long shot, though, isn't it?
It is. But sometimes long shots pay off.
True enough.
Unfortunately for Alix, though, this one doesn't. The court rules that even if there were problems with the DNA evidence, there was still plenty of other evidence proving that he was guilty of the other crimes.
So they're saying that even if the DNA evidence had been perfect, it wouldn't have changed the outcome of the trial.
Exactly. It's a major setback for Alix and his legal team.
It's a reminder that even with the best intentions, the justice system isn't perfect. People make mistakes. Evidence gets messed up. And sometimes those mistakes can have really serious consequences.
Yeah. And so, despite all their efforts, Alix's execution date is getting closer and closer. He's run out of legal options. The final chapter of his story is about to begin. It's March of 2010. And after all those years of appeals and legal battles, Franklin DeWayne Alix is finally being walked down to the execution chamber at the Huntsville unit in Texas.
I can't even imagine what must be going through someone's mind at a time like that. You knowing that you're about to face the ultimate punishment.
Yeah, it's got to be a really heavy experience, not just for the person being executed, but for everyone involved. Like Alix, he actually refused his last meal.
Huh. I wonder what that means. Is it a sign of giving up? Or maybe even one last act of defiance?
It's really hard to say. But then his last statement, it seems like he's trying to come to terms with what he's done. And you know what people are going to think of him? He says, "I am not the monster they made me out to be. I made lots of mistakes that took your son. I messed up, made poor choices. I'll take it to the grave. I will be at peace. It is what it is. I got peace in my heart."
Or there's a lot to unpack there, isn't there? It's almost like his whole life was full of contradictions, and that last statement is no different. He says he's not a monster, but he admits that he made mistakes that cost someone their life. He says he's at peace, But you can still sense that he's struggling with accepting full responsibility. It makes you wonder, did he ever really understand the impact of what he did? Or was that just him trying to make himself feel better before he died?
It's a really tough question. And then, of course, you have to think about the victims' families who were there at the execution. They'd been waiting for this moment for years, hoping for some kind of closure.
I can't even imagine what that must have been like for them to finally see the person who took so much from them be held accountable.
Yeah, Eric Bridgeford's mother, Janie, she brought a photo of her son with her to the execution. She said she didn't get any satisfaction out of seeing Alix die, and that she forgave him. But it took her 2 whole years after Eric was killed before she could even look at pictures of him.
It just goes to show you how deep those wounds go and how long it can take to even start to heal.
Christopher Thomas's sister, Fernelli Fitzgerald, she said she had to forgive Alix, not for him, but for herself. It's amazing how people find different ways to cope with that kind of loss and trauma.
It's a testament to the human spirit, even in the face of unimaginable pain, people find a way to keep going.
So as we wrap up this deep dive, I'm curious what stood out to you the most about Alix's story.
For me, it's just how sad it all is, Alex's life could have turned out so differently. If maybe someone had stepped in earlier on, if he'd gotten help when he first started getting into trouble. Instead, it's like each crime led to the next one, and he just kept going further and further down this dark path. It really makes you think about what could have been.
And even now, after going through all of this, we still don't have a clear answer to the big question. Why? Why did he do it? Was he just a bad person deep down? Or did something happen to him that pushed him over the edge?
I don't think there's an easy answer. And that's what makes this case so fascinating. It's not just about the crimes themselves. It's about human nature. It's about the choices we make and the things that shape who we become.
We might never know for sure what drove Franklin DeWayne Alix to do the things he did, but his story is a reminder that even in the darkest of times, there's always hope for redemption, and that forgiveness is possible even when it feels impossible. Thanks for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it as thought-provoking as we did. Until next time, keep exploring. Stay curious and remember the truth is out there waiting to be discovered.